Okay, so this is officially the 13th week we're doing this. We called Hadrocho. I just want to reiterate my kavanah with doing this, which is really something that, frankly, has not been done for our for people who went out on shlichus, or people who became rabbonim, or other askonei tzibur mechanchim. And I hear it all the time because people reach out to me and I do the different programs I do. And one of the biggest complaints that most shluchim have, even those that are very educated and talmidei chachamim, is that no one really ever trained them how to speak to people. So yes, everyone knows how to be nice and you invite people, but if someone has a real challenge, balabatim with children, their own shalom bayis issues, personal stuff, most won't tell you necessarily, but they've told me that they came out of yeshiva, they could answer, some of them are rabbonim and even dayanim, they can paskin a shaila, but they don't know how to speak about things that are especially more sensitive matters, personal matters, emotional matters. And it's not a surprise because we're not trained. So some people just have a chush, an instinct. They either just have that type of people skills and have a certain chachmas hanefesh, you can say, a certain intuition, if you wish, and they're just good at giving advice and good at listening to people and trying to, but most don't necessarily have that. So one of the things, that's why when I was asked to teach here, was specifically asked, can you do that? Because so many of us didn't get that. However, you're going to learn this the hard way, because when you came out of yeshiva, they don't really, most of us are not even aware that we're lacking something like that. And you learn on the job. Whatever you'll be doing, you're going to see these issues are going to come up one way or another. But regardless, I just was reiterating the purpose of why I was doing this in the first place. But let me address a few questions that have come up. One question that was now posed, which is the issue, we spoke about shalom bayis in the earlier shiurim, but how do you deal if you know somebody who's having shalom bayis issues, and for that matter, I'll broaden the question, not just shalom bayis issues. What do you do if you know someone, either you're a friend with them, or even maybe you're not such a friend, but you became aware of an issue a person's struggling with, and what do you do about it? Do you get involved? Do you not get involved? Obviously, if they come and ask you for help, it's one thing. If they don't come and ask you for help, do you offer it? Or so it's a good question, especially apiteira b'chlal. It's leisamid al dam re'echa or leifneiver leisita michshel. There's different halachas that actually regard. What do you do if you know about a situation? Do you say something? Don't you say something? And what do you say? So let me broaden the question, which affects a lot of different situations. I'll start with maybe a good story, a story that I heard my father, the Rebbe told my father. It's a good, I think, good context. I may have told it, maybe you've heard it. Yechidus, and my father was a journalist, as you know, Itanai, newspaperman. And the Rebbe, a few times this happened, but I'm talking about one particular one. It was Pasha Shmeis, actually. My father was in Yechidus. It was around Chavdal Teva's time. And the Rebbe said to him, "Is a journalist, is Efshel Mr. Machen an interview? Maybe you want to make an interview." The Rebbe told my father, there was no one else there, Yeah, who else? There's only two people still there, Maybe you want an interview. This happened 3 times, different times, but the time I'm going to share with is this. So my father said to the Rebbe, "Ken alt fragen," and he can ask anything, out of respect. So the Rebbe said, in America, in Censuria, there's no censorship, so you can ask anything. So my father said, people want to know, especially in the Weltische, the Litrische Welt, the Weltische Eden, they want to know why the Rebbe does not consult with other Gdei Yisrael or with different vadim before he comes out with a mitzvah or a campaign that's it. And the Rebbe does things what they call unilaterally. He announces it and that's it. He doesn't discuss it with anyone. So the Rebbe said, this is week. The week was Parsha Shmeis. Parsha Shmeis, and the Rebbe asked the question. You know the story when Moshe saw that the Mitzri was hitting a Jew. So it says that Moshe looked, Vayifem Moshe koi v'koi, v'yarki ein ish. That Moshe looked here and saw there's no ish, there's no one around. And then he went out and killed the Mitzri and buried him in the sand. So the Rebbe said, what was Vayifem Moshe koi v'koi? Like, why did he have to look around? What was he afraid of? So Rashi says that he was looking to see if anyone was going to come out. And it said, Soyim will come out of this Mitzri. So he wouldn't, he wanted to know. But the Rebbe said, but push the pshat. Moshe afraid? And it didn't help anyway, the Rebbe said, because Dosav Aviram did see Moshe kill the Mitzri, and they mastered it. And that's why Moshe had to run away from Mitzrayim. So the Rebbe said, the push the tight pshat is azay. Moshe sees a Jew is being attacked, is being hurt. Someone's hitting a Jew. So Vayifa Moshe Kevakei is looking around. Does anyone care? Does any simas lev? Does anybody care that this Jew is being hurt? And he saw Vayar Kein Ish. He saw there's no one that cares. So he did what he had to do. He didn't make any asifas and he didn't go consult anyone. He did what he had to do. That was the Rebbe's answer. And my father, when he went out of Yechidus, so the Bochum right away came running over to him and asked him, say something from the Yechidus. So that my father told the Bochum that the Rebbe said he's Moshe Rabbeinu. That was my father's take on it. The point I want to make is, what was the Rebbe saying? That rave of the inyanim that Rebbe did were not things that others were doing. The etzem inyan to send out shluchim, thousands of them, was not only no one was doing it, they actually criticized the Rebbe for doing it. But the Rebbe saw the day Yosum, Atin Eikesh Nishbu, and it's Pekuach Nefesh, Beruchnis, Begashmis. And the Rebbe did what he had to do. If he was waiting to make an asifa and get everybody's opinion, first of all, that would take time. The fire is burning. You can't wait. Second of all, what happened? They didn't agree. The Rebbe, as a true leader, that's what a leader does. So I say that as a Hagdamah. By the Rebbe, there was never the idea that you stand on the sideline when you see something. It's not like, oh, you know what am I mixing into other person's business? If you're able to, if Hashgacha Pratis led you, that you know about something, you have to do something about it. At the same time, let's be honest, it has to be practical. If you go over to someone and say, I hear you're going through difficulties in Shalom Bayis, or you have other issues, they may look at you and say, what are you mixing into my business? How do you know? They may deny it, and you may end up not helping them. They may end up being actually offending them. So yes, the kavanah is good, but the question is it going to be of benefit? And we see this from the Rebbe as well. When people ask the Rebbe, so obviously we care. That's not a shayla, that we see someone going through a difficulty, we should care. That's less mandapolit. The question is, how do you express that care? And what could you do? So I want to share another story because it helps a lot put this into context. In Lamed Tovshin Lamed Zayin, we've spoken about this. The Rebbe came out with Mashpim, Yutas Kislev, Lamed Zayin. And the Rebbe continued, Yutas Kislev, and then Resh Chodesh Shvat, I think, and Tu B'Shvat, Yud Shvat, and Tu B'Shvat. That whole Tkufa, from Kislev through, basically Yutas Kislev through Yud Shvat, the Rebbe started about Mashpim and spoke Arichis, that every person, Zolzachon Shlogen, should offer himself and volunteer to be a mashpia. The Rebbe said it could be you're a mashpia only to one person. It's not about necessarily official. And the Rebbe said, and if you don't work out, it's not a lifetime appointment. So it's nishfaribel haben, and you won't continue. But the Rebbe was very strong about the achrayis that we all have. Like the Alter Rebbe writes in the Agdama to Tanya, that you shouldn't prav a shifl shel sheker and not be menei bar. You have to do whatever you can to help another person. It's a request the Alter Rebbe makes. If someone has an issue and they can't understand how to bring it out of Tanya, you should offer your service. Okay. So I shared this in one of my Sunday night programs a few years ago, maybe 2-3 years ago, the Sikh of Yutas Kislev. And I said, this is a simple thing that all of us, You never know who knows you, who lives near you, or who may come your way. And maybe that you can be their mashpia. So let me tell you what happened. Interesting thing happened. Get a call from a woman, Crown Heights, and she said, I heard your program, and I immediately took it to heart because my downstairs tenant in my house, it's a couple, and they're always fighting. I hear them yelling at each other. And though I don't want to hear it, and my husband doesn't want to hear it, we try to close the door. But we live in a house that you hear what's going on by another person's house. And I always said to my husband, you know what, we can't mix into someone else's business, we just ignore it. But then I heard you speak about this, that you can't just ignore. Maybe you could be of help. So I decided I'll take the courage, and I will wait one day when she goes out of the house, when she's alone, and I'll go over to like woman to woman, and maybe just see. And right away, so she said, that's what I did. I went outside. It wasn't easy. I remember my heart was beating. I felt very nervous because, she could always tell me, what's mishtas and what are you mixing into my business? And I said to her, I want to ask you something. And if you feel I'm mixing into your business, I immediately will withdraw as if we never spoke. So I apologize. She made it clear that I'm not here to, only if you said, I can't help but hear from time to time that you're having conflicts in your house. And, I'm just here, I want to tell you, I'm here for you. If any way you want to talk and communicate. And not only did the woman, was she not offended, she started crying. She said, I live here, we're both Bali Tshuva. We have no one to talk to. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate you reaching out to me. And they became friends. I don't even know all the details, but bottom line, she had someone to speak to. And it was all because I had chazed that sikha from Teskis Lamed Zayin years ago, that the woman did it. So you see from this, that number one, the kavanah is you have to always care. Number two, you never know. Sometimes you think, maybe you shouldn't mix in. Maybe at times you could actually help someone. But you have to be very sensitive. That's why I'm giving this long introduction. You have to be very sensitive. And then the question is, what's the best way to help? So I'll use a lot of examples. I deal with this almost on a daily basis. There people come to me with an issue. They're asking me, what should they do? So I always answer, who is the best person to speak to this? This is the first thing you have to establish. You may know about it, but you may not be the best person to speak to the individual. Someone's going through a shalom bayis issue, whether it's the husband or the wife. You may know about it, and you may care, and you may even be friends with the person, but you have to ask yourself the first question, who's the best person that this person is going to respond to? You may not be the person. You may be too close. Sometimes someone that knows someone well, people are embarrassed. They want to go to someone they don't know so well. So that's the first thing you have to establish. Who's the best person to speak? Sometimes people call me, maybe I can speak. I mean, just mamash almost on a daily basis. Someone just yesterday, mother's asking me to call her son who doesn't want to come out of his room. So I said, he doesn't know me. I call him. He'll probably be respectful. He's not going to hang up the phone on me. But he has to want. You can't help someone that doesn't. I said, who knows him? I'm not talking about family members. Maybe he has a friend. Maybe he has a cousin. Maybe he has a brother, a sister. Maybe somebody. So the first thing is to establish who's the best person to be the one that speaks to the person. And not always the same person. I'm telling you, I know people. I know how to speak to people, but sometimes I'm not the right person. So I look for who's the right one. Why am I not the right person? Maybe they'll be intimidated by me. Maybe I'm too much of a public figure. Maybe they'll be embarrassed. Sometimes you have to be very sensitive that remember, the kavanah is not that you should be the one that helps. The kavanah is they should be helped. Who's the person? That has to be determined. So that's the first thing, that mistakes are made sometimes in this regard. And then it ends up causing more problems. Remember last week or 2 weeks ago, I read the tzaddik from the Rebbe that the person, when you go to want to be mashpia on someone, has to be someone who's able to listen, and someone who's sensitive, and someone who you can disagree with. Because if you send someone the wrong person, then the person that you could also create damage. Because they'll say, I already spoke to someone, I don't need to speak to anyone. So that's Even HaBeichen number one, that you need to know who's the right person to speak to this individual. If you happen to be the person and you think, why not? And if you feel you can go over in a sensitive way that won't cause a backlash and problems, then by all means, I'll talk about that in a moment. The second thing you have to determine is, how do you know about it? If you know about it, let's say the wife told you, and the husband doesn't know that she told you, it's not so pashut. You can't just go over and I said, your wife told me that you guys are having a problem. Because then he's going to go home and say, what gave you a right to tell this guy? So you have to also be sensitive to this. I mean, this may be a davar poshet, but still, I want to spell it out because I know these mistakes are happening. All again with good kavanas. So you have to know, how did you know? Because if you start speaking to someone, they'll say, how do you know there's a problem? Not that doesn't mean there isn't one, but it right away creates a wall because he's going to put up a wall. He's going to say, well, so you have to also be sensitive to that. How do you know? So that's a very important point. And it could be several ways. Now, it could also be a situation where the guy came to you, or it could be a woman. The woman came to a woman, whatever. I'm not going into exact details. So that's another story. If someone comes to you and is asking for help, it's very different because there's a Pesach Pesuach because the guy is asking for help. So I'll talk about that in a moment as well. But I just want to go through all the scenarios because they're all possible. You learn Gemara every Hechet Timtza you have to go through. And these are all real situations. Now, if let's assume that you have a way to speak about it because either the person spoke to you or you have a whatever, something came up that it's not going to be a problem. But remember, you have to be very aware that people are going to resist very often. And the first thing they're going to do is they're going to deny. They'll say, nothing's wrong. I mean, I dealt with such horrible situations where people told me, nothing, no big thing, it was a small thing, and it was mamish geferlich, actually. Because that's how people are. They first of all, they're ashamed, and many people would like to put things under the carpet. It's just easier. So you have to have chokhmah here, not just what to say, also what not to say, and how to say it. That's why I'm, again, being meidich here. So let's talk about a situation. A guy comes to you, let's say it's a chaver, let's say it's a guy it could be a relative, it could be anybody. If they come to speak to you and they bring it up, then for sure, obviously, that's like mamish, you can't say to them, I don't know what to tell you. So you have to listen closely. So that's the next step, listening. Critical to listen. And most important, you don't want to take sides. Because very often the guy, let's say this is the guy that's talking to you. So in everybody by nature is an igei bedavar. So he wants you to basically agree with him. And say that his wife is the problem. I mean, there are exceptions to that. But that often happens. That they want you to basically say you're right, and you should do this, and you should do that. Because that's what the nature of people, they want to be right. The truth is, we don't know the truth. I always tell a couple that speaks to me, I always say there's three stories. There's her story, there's his story, and there's the truth. Each one has an epis. I'm not saying this sheker legamri, but it's negias. So the first thing is to try to create a conversation with the person that's speaking to you and say, and what does your wife say? Just to get him. He may right away say, my wife, she's an action. She doesn't want to do this. She doesn't want to do that. He may dismiss her, but you still have to be sensitive and say, but it's important to know how she's thinking. Let's say she's 100% wrong, to make him feel good. But how is she thinking? What would she say if she was in the conversation? And then comes the real next step, which is what I always do. And it's muchach to do. It's even not pita halacha you have to do this. You're not sitting in a din teda, remember. So it's not a shaila of halacha. Someone can speak to you and the other person's not there. This is about eitzah teva. Like the Rebbe says, difference between a rov and a seilach harav and knelach hachaver. And the famous sheftim sich, sheftayich and yitzayich. So it's a yeyit, so it doesn't apply halachas, but still common sense dictates that you want to be able to hear them both out. So you always want to get to a place to say, would your wife agree or three of us to speak? If you feel equipped, obviously, to do that. And remember, we're not here looking for a psak, you're looking for being friendly, a friendly eitzah. If you can pull that off, that's the first most important step because there's no way to solve a shalom bayis issue with one side. Just like anything, you need to hear both sides. And you sometimes come away with a completely different picture once you hear the other person speak. And very often, a guy, let's say, or a woman for that matter, will not want to do that. They'll say, I don't want to speak with my wife. She's bad. She's listening to her mother. She's listening to her sisters, whatever. They're all against me. This is all the language that often you hear. And you still have to very calmly and kindly, not talk about argue. Never argue with someone who's in a situation where they're emotionally distraught or in a situation where a matzav, a sensitive matzav. You say, to help, it would be helpful. Now, if the person is a chassidish person, you could always invoke the name of the Lord, which is the Rebbe, in this case. I mean the Shem HaMushal. You say that's what the Rebbe is matzia. That whenever there's a situation, you want to hear everyone speak, because at the end of the day, if you want shalom bayis with your wife, you need her cooperation. You can't force someone to have shalom bayis. The expression as blut vetzel gießen aber shalom b'zayin doesn't work here exactly, because you need both. So if you can convince the guy or the person you're speaking to have a conversation a three-way, it's a very good beginning. Not always easy to do, but that you have to work toward that, because there's no way that you can really resolve. Now, if a person refuses, so then what you want to really leave them with is some eitzah that, let's be honest, and I said it, and I say it again and again. The yesod of all shalom bayis is bittul. Even if you're right, shalom bayis is not built on right or wrong. It says, emes v'shalom ahevu. It says, chesed ve'emes ma'yin tzarua, right? Chesed. Shalom bayis is built on chesed, not on emes. Doesn't mean it's sheker. But you see, even by shidduchim, it says, mutar l'shanis. Why? Because shalom bayis is not about who's right and wrong. This isn't a din Torah of dinei mominus, where there's nothing personal involved. Even a din Torah, we also look for a pshara, we look to save face, we look for a way that both parties won't go crazy. But when it comes to shalom bayis, it's all about really al chesed more than emes. So you want to get the person to get into more chesedic mode than emes mode. Again, I'm not talking about sheker. But the key is that it should be sensitive. So if you can be mashpia a guy to be that way, that is already also a teyelis. So you have to also, basically what you see what I'm saying here is that you have to also know what your goals are. You can't always expect you're going to become a savior and you'll give eitzah and everything magic will happen. Halavai. Sometimes that happens, especially if you start hearing the issues, which leads me to the next. But what are the issues? If the guy is ready to come share with you the issues, and very often they are not, most people will not tell you the real issues. They'll tell you the chetzenistic issues, the ones that are like my wife squeezes the toothpaste from the middle of the tube, or she's never on time, or the food is not ready when I come home, or something like that. I can tell you that's not the issue. Those are symptoms. The issues are usually deeper. I mean, Rabbi Marlow once said to me that all shalom bayis issues is either sexual or dinei mominus. That's what he told me. So I said to him, only those two things? He says everything goes under those two. I mean, he's a Rav, he said it, and there's a certain truth to it. But I can see other things. Like, for example, when people are bothered, my wife is not frum enough, or my husband's not frum enough, or they're too frum, or something like that. That is not the sod of the issue. Because if two people really love each other, and they care about each other, we know, I already mentioned that Rambam says, Yim cheshmei, Eibishter says, Yim cheshmi, kadei shalom ben ish v'ishtei. So the Eibishter does not let you use religion against a husband and a wife. And you work it out. You would need a third party, you go to a third party, which we'll talk about shortly as well. So you have to also see what the issues are. Now, if the guy is ready to speak to you openly, then you see if it's a deeper thing, then you have to also recognize whether you're out of your depth or not. Like you may have to suggest to the person, listen, I'm happy to be your friend. I'm happy to support you, help you work this through. But I think you need to speak to someone that's more equipped, or more competent, someone a little more trained. And there's nothing wrong with saying that if you feel that's what it's come down to. That's one thing. Now, regarding a third party, the Rebbe says again and again in Igros Kodesh and letters of Hadrocho and so on, that if it's an seemingly irreconcilable difference, and seems like an issue, that you have to both go to a third party that's objective, that you both trust, and listen to the person. Or at least present what you have to say. And the Rebbe always says, everybody should be allowed to present everything. No one silences or quiets the other person. You have to be able to hear it out. Now, I would always focus that it doesn't have to be done in a series. A lot of couples are afraid of this, because that means their marriage is really now officially on the rocks. So they don't want to acknowledge that. That's why I think you have to do it sometimes in a lighter way by saying, doesn't hurt. We all go. You go advice to a lawyer to buy a house, or to an accountant for your taxes or whatever. You're going for an eitzah. Let's not make it into. It's not a din Torah. It's not a psak. Not even a mediation. We're not talking about binding arbitration or something. The more lighter you make it, generally people are easier for them to deal with. Now, I'm assuming, I don't want to assume anything. This could be an issue of people who are married 20, 30 years too. But I'm focusing more on early marriage, where the first year, the second year, or the early years. Because something longer period, there you have to deal with the whole history and see where it goes back to. Now, a few other points I want to make regarding this. It's vital also to see if the person you're speaking to has some affection and some respect for their spouse. What do I mean by that? Like sometimes I'll ask someone to tell me, has it been bad from day one when you got married, from the first night? By dating, did you guys get along? Sometimes people will say we got very well along and something happened recently. Sometimes they'll say, no, even when I was dating, I wasn't so sure. I was pressured, I was pushed. See, these are very different answers. So you have to, again, answer, you have to answer le'inyan. That's the din as well. You can't answer one person's scenario with a different type of answer. If it's something that is happened recently, so then try to identify what happened. And I'll give you an example. It could be, I hate going to my in-laws. My wife loves to go Friday night. I hate it. They're judgmental. They don't like me, this, and this. And I'm trying to stay home. My wife wants to go. And in the beginning, this wasn't an issue. But now I see she doesn't stop. She wants to always go. Now, that's a legitimate issue. Obviously, there's deeper stuff there as well, because you know what? You're a little bittle. So you go, so what? It's not so pleasant. That's part of life. You go and you swallow things. Why is it bothering you so crazy? You're not living by them. But who knows? You can never know. Sometimes in-laws can be a pain. Let's be honest. Some of them, they sometimes are very critical, and they may be telling your wife. He says they keep telling my wife things are bad about me. This is not an uncommon complaint. Now, this indeed is the case, which again could be also exaggerated. Remember, some people are very sensitive, and they're making a whole big monster out of something that's not so big. So then the question is, first of all, can we find a compromise? You have to go every Friday night. Maybe you go once a month. You go Yom Tov, Purim, Pesach. So you have to also get this. So there again, you need to have the wife's opinion here. If the wife is adamant, like she'll say, I don't see any problem. My parents are loving parents. They're not critical. He's just extra sensitive, etc. So you want to find a happy medium. Can you find a place where both are comfortable? It says you have to go every week. It's good for husband and wife, especially Shana and Shena, the early part of their marriage, to be together. They have to always be in their parents' house. So you try to find a possibility. Now, sometimes it's not so easy, and sometimes it's not that difficult if you speak menschlich. Because remember, what happens often is the guy, let's say, feels well criticized. And he starts yelling at his wife and say, you should defend me. Why are you always taking your mother or father's side? And why do we have to always go there? So then that alone's created new tensions. And now it's impossible to get anywhere. A third party, who, let's say you are giving advice and you're listening to one of them or to either of them or both of them, you could say, look, let's step back a moment. I understand this has already gotten to a point where you're both angry at each other. But let's go back. You're married with each other. Can we find something that will work, that both of you can work? And you'll be surprised. Sometimes that helps because they're already in a matzav ruach, that they're already in confrontation. You're not. And you don't want to be in that place. You want to be in a place that you can give some eitzah. That's just an example. Now, if it's something else that came up, you have to identify what it is. Like, say like a person will say, I really love my wife. I respect her. It's a lot of mileage she has. And I know why I married her. But there's some things that are now really bugging me. So here's where you need to be smart and figure out to separate the two. Then you have situations opposite. Someone will say, you know what? I didn't know my wife. When we dated, I felt some things, but I overlooked it. And the truth is, now I look back, it was never really good. That's a very different response. So each one has a different approach. The first situation, there you have to really see and say, okay, but if you love her and you feel she's a good person, so look, it's a package deal. Why do you think these things are suddenly overweighing everything else? You want to get to the issue, what's really bothering the person. Now, I'll be very honest with you. This is something that's sensitive, but I'll say it anyway. Very often it has to do with bedroom stuff. And people will not admit it. They're not going to say that because they're embarrassed. But if you push it, they'll start saying, you know what, my wife is not really there with me. She just, it's just technical. She doesn't really show affection. She's not emotional. I mean, this will come up. Not every case, but don't be surprised. This is very often part of it. And it's a very vulnerable situation because People don't like to talk about it because it makes them feel like, what, I'm a grubby young, I need to have my wife express, or my wife touch me a certain way, etc. So a lot of people are ashamed to talk about it, especially if they're Chassidish people. But it's an issue. There's no question it's an issue. Now, if you're in the position that you're able to talk to someone about that, you have to make that decision. I wouldn't advise necessarily, usually, if you yourself are in that same boat, meaning you're the same age, you don't have the experience, this needs more experience than just a friend. You can be friendly with the person and say, let's find someone else to speak. I would probably advise, if it was anyone in this kollel or anyone of this age, I would probably not advise you to become a sex therapist. Let's put it that way. And I don't mean in that way. I mean to say, b'chlal, to go there, because there you need someone who's a little more experienced and also how to speak about it in the right way. But it's an issue, and you cannot deny this issue. So it's important. You must identify as much as possible what is the issue. And look, there's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, this is my friend. I found out at least he shared with me some of the issues. So now, because you have more information, you can now say, let me go consult with someone a little older who, let's say, deals with marital issues or stuff like that, and see what they say. And now, but you can come, like if someone comes to me and says, here's the situation I'm in, the more information they give, the better advice you can give. If you say, what's the problem? You say, I don't know. They're just having problems. So the more you can find out, the better it is. Even if you yourself are not the one that's going to be the so-called doctor or the healer here. So don't underestimate what a friend can do. A friend can definitely find out information. And you know what? This person may tell you something they will not tell a therapist or a more experienced person. Now, if it's a situation that goes back, and they start saying the whole dating, I don't think this person was really for me, and you discover. So listen, number one is people are negay b'davar. Just because someone says that, it doesn't mean it's l'kuli emes. That's how they feel right now. And so I always do, I start probing. I say, so you're telling me you're an intelligent person. How many dates did you go on? Let's say 6 dates, 3 dates, 10 dates, whatever. Everybody has their number. So you tell me all these dates, you asked questions, you had conversations, and you didn't see any of this. And why did you overlook it? So some people will say, you know what? I was pressured. I was pressured to finish already, and I overlooked some of the issues that bothered me. This is not uncommon as well. Here, it's already another thing. But then there's the other point of it is that you stood under a chuppah, Kedash Meishiv Yisrael, a Kedushin, that the Eibishter is part of a shutef with you. So you also have the Eibishter's keches here, and you have the Rebbe's brachas. So remember, if it's before the fact, the guy is dating and has sveikis and questions, no. But we're talking about after the fact. So you don't just say to somebody, hey, you're right, maybe it's a mekach tos. No. You want to push it all the way because there's stakes here. Now, of course, if there's a child already, that makes it even more. But even without a child, we don't just go to a get, unless you have no choice. So you can't feel, just because, let's say you even feel in your heart that maybe this is really not going to work out, we have to still make the ishtadlus as much as possible. I will go out of my way, even if I don't have much hope, you don't want to leave any stone unturned, because as Gocha Prati, someone comes to you, remember another thing you have to remember. Like I always told this to younger light or others who have these issues. I said, and how do you know if, let's say you leave this marriage, how do you know these issues are not going to come up with another person? Maybe you're part of the issue. You think you just get rid of this person and you just get out of it, everything is like clean. Maybe this is Megala, there's something to work on. And every marriage you need to work on. This is part of the sprach that you have to have when you're speaking in these situations. About Kamuvim, you have to really, you cannot, in other words, we don't go with an approach just because someone doesn't like the marriage. And even if it sounds legitimate, and even if both parties say it, we don't just go and say, okay, both are agreeable, let's do let's do it in an amicable way, and get. That's a last resort. Yes, a get is apitera, but only as a last resort. So the point is, you have to do whatever you can possibly. And again, I'm not talking about things that are meshugit. I'm talking about, so there's no way a normal Rav or even a Yeyetz would ever say to somebody, you're right, let's go to divorce. Any normal Rav is going to say, did you talk to a third party? Did you discuss it? Did you look deeper? If someone says, no, I just don't want to be in this marriage. Now, that's not derech hatera. There's no such thing. You don't want to be, we respect that, but you're negay b'davar, and you may not see everything, and you may have some blind spots, and there may be things that can be corrected. Now, obviously, we all know that you can always go to a get. That's always an option. But to go too early is not the derech. You first want to make sure that you cover all the bases as much as possible. And you have situations. You have a situation where the husband wants to stay in the marriage and work on it, and the wife doesn't. Or the opposite. So each case, again, case by case. I mean, I'm bekavona going through so many options because they're not all the same. And everyone has to be addressed somewhat differently. So what else would I add to the Nekudah? The Rebbe also talks a lot about, is there Yisei Hateiv mitzvah in the marriage? What does that mean? That often when people start being very lax about certain things, then they don't have a foundation. I'll be again very blunt. We're talking like things that matter. You have situations where husband and wife, for example, are somewhat makel in Yoni Taras Mishpach. Now, I'm not talking now mitzad halacha and chumras and so on. But you know what? They became very lax in it. We're not here to judge them. People do what they do. We all have to look at ourselves. You don't look at others. So you have to be very careful not to be judgmental. And yet at the same time, remember the Yesodus of Torah mitzvahs. What's the meaning of a Yesod? A Yesod is a foundation that holds up a building. When you don't have a strong foundation, the building is going to be shaky. So here you have to be extremely careful. And I say this especially, you need real experience how to say this properly. You don't want to come across, are you guys maybe doing something a little bit makel? Because first of all, you don't want to come across as judgmental. You also don't want them to feel feel ashamed, embarrass them. But nevertheless, there's ways to explain it. That the fact is, when a person has Shabbos in their house and kosher, and the three mitzvahs, the main three mitzvahs, Chana, Chala Nida Adlokas Neres, which is basically Kashrus, Achil V'Shtia, Shabbos, and Taras Mishpacha. What does it mean you say this? It means you have certain things in place. I was just counseling a couple, mamish earlier today, and they don't keep Shabbos. They grew up here and all that, but they're very lax on Shabbos, and they, and it's so I said to them, so is there anything in your life during the week that you both and your family, they have children as well, that you and your family get together, you must do? They said, no, not really. So I said, don't you see, forget about now. I'm not talking about the mitzvah of Shabbos. Let's just talk about the concept that every Friday night, the children and we come together by the table. If you don't have that, you're missing a yesod, you're missing a consistency. Purim coming, Pesach coming. I'm not talking now even mitzad Amunah and the Tzivur Hashem. I'm talking about the common sense, like the logic of it. That you need to have in life, so to speak, anchors that create structure. And these Yom Tov create structure. So I said, you're not ready yet to keep Shabbos mitzad Amunah because you don't like Shabbos when you grow up, or whatever your reasons are. So do it for the health of your family and home. And today they committed. They said, you know what, it's a good idea. Purim is coming. We were going to go skiing or whatever they were going to do, the whole weekend somewhere. They're going to stay home. They're going to do Purim. And I said, do it your way. I'm not telling you now to have to do it in the most exactly as your their father was a Shugan Kanoi, his father, which of course turned them off. So what's my point? You have to find a way to explain that you say this of Yiddishkeit. You say the Rebbe says in the letter, said the Yasid, what is the lashon? Binyan adiyav miyusad al Yisei the Ateiru mitzvahs kvi shehem orim b'moyer shebechsid zuhi pnibis Ateiru zuhi b'moyer shebechid zuhi Teres achsidus. So besides obviously the poshet, it's also because when you have a foundation, it helps you get through difficult moments because you have something we have in common. I say what you're going to be doing is you're going to grow apart because you have nothing in common. You do this Friday night, you do that Friday night. There's nothing that's like a glue that holds you together. So that's another point about looking at their ruchnius. And finally, I want to say one more thing. I find this is mamish, I think, one of the biggest things of all. At the end of the day, Shalom Bayis is not a pi Kabbalah sale alone. It's because two people want to get along. They don't want to get along, and they're just going to be Shalom Bayis mitzad Kabbalah sale. I don't think it's going to be work. Obviously, you need Kabbalah sale as a yesod, but you need also that they enjoy each other. I always look to find something that the couple enjoys doing together, whether it's taking a walk, whether it's reading something, whether it's learning, because if you leave two people just sitting on top of each other with their conflicts, it gets too overwhelming. So you always look for something that they find in common among them. If you can find between a couple something in common that they enjoy, it's a good place to begin rebuilding anything. Now, obviously, when there's real problems, that's really necessary. I deal with a lot of types of couples, including completely people who are not Shem Torah Mitzvah. I mean, even Taneka Shenishbu. And some come to me, they like my approach, they learned with me in classes and so on. And I always say, when people ask me, they want to, either I should be Masadi Kedushin or they want me to give them advice. So I always tell them, look, the three foundations of Judaism are the three I just mentioned. Even if you're not used to it, you've never done kosher or Shabbos or Taras Mishpacha, at least learn about it. And try to introduce something of these three in your life, because these will be foundations that will carry you. The second thing I always say to them is, try to designate, right now you're starting a new relationship, a marriage, designate once a week that no matter what happens, learn together. A half hour Thursday night or Friday night, whenever it works, an hour, doesn't matter. Learn something together. You can learn whether it's a parsha or something, a spiritual ideas or something that speaks to both of you. But commit to it like, say Taroscha Kva. It should be every week. And because that is another part that keeps the two of you together. Anyway, interesting, they committed to this. Here's a real story that happened. It's happened over 7-8 years ago. I mean, many times I've given this advice, but this story I'm telling is it's okay. They got married, and they committed. They told me they made their kosher, the kitchen kosher. They started with Friday night. Now they're doing more Shabbos day too. Taras Mishpacha, they're doing certain things. She goes to the mikveh. There are a few things they're doing, not everything perfect. They're growing, good. And they decided to learn together, yeah. I also told them once a month they should have a mesiba in their house. Like a Beis Vad L'Chacham, invite friends over, have a speaker, or do something together. Just make your home into a sanctuary, basically. Okay. They told me, this was around 2 years ago, that their marriage was going well. And then they were both very busy. She was starting a new business. He had to travel a lot. It was a whole thing. They started growing apart, the kids, to the point where they started getting into conflicts and fighting again and again and again. And so there was a point they Pasha didn't speak to each other. And they were already thinking, this is ridiculous. This marriage isn't working. But the only thing, because they promised me and themselves that they would continue to learn Thursday night, even if they didn't speak all week, Thursday night they would learn together. And they told me that half hour that they learned, that they committed to, ended up saving their marriage. Because they did that even when they were angry at each other. So basically, what's like the state, they did something that was not about them, and they stuck to it. So so what happened was, after a few weeks, after a few months, they said, what? We're learning well together. Why can't we rebuild whatever we had? Why are we letting the rest of the week destroy our marriage? And because they committed to it, it's interesting, was the chinuch right? That right? That's the Lashon, okay, I mamish saw it with my own eyes. Now, I always knew the power, but they told me the story. And they have a beautiful life now. And now they became much more frum because they realized that was something that was higher than both of them that kept them together. And I told them, it's like the chuppah. The chuppah is not the isha, it's the shkina shruya, the yud k that makes the ish and isha yud k, therefore shkina mitzriya b'name. When it's without the yud k, it's ish, and they go to war. So I would apply the same thing, even if people are completely within the community, the same idea. Are they doing something together that's more than just about you and me? And that can be a big savior. Now, of course, once people are already in a conflict, they're not so open to say, okay, you know what, let's start learning together. But the goal is obviously to address it in that fashion. So I think I covered this pretty thoroughly, at least in different angles. So to sum up, we don't ever ignore any problem. The question is, Shaila, is how to address it, whether it should be you or somebody else. And then I address the different approaches of how to address something sensitively also with seichel. Now, obviously, case by case. It's chanech not al pidarke, not just not everyone is al pidarke. There are no two people alike. Some people respond to one thing, some people respond to another. Unfortunately, today there's more divorce than ever. So once given the iflig, once the door is open, other people say, "Oh, it's gefährlich." My friend also got divorced. That's a big problem because people make it very light, but it's not light at all. People do not realize. If there's children, for sure, I'm not even talking about that. But people don't realize. They think it's just going to be easy. It's not correct. Even if two people are really not getting along and they get divorced, at the end of the day, does not mean that the next relationship they're going to find is going to be perfect. Now, I'm not saying it's not possible. I've seen it happen. Sometimes, yeah. Some two people was like, I'm not even going to say mekach tos, you can never say, because it was a kedushin. But whatever, it didn't work out. They didn't make the right keli. They were not the right, they didn't find the keches, whatever it may be. We're not here to judge. But you want to do everything possible because the other option is always many ways worse. And people don't realize it. They think it's a glick, I'll get divorced and I'll find a romantic partner, love forever, happily ever after, and so on. Halavai, that's the case. It's usually not the case. So I'm just saying that. I'm not saying you have to use that to threaten anyone and tell them, listen, you think this is bad, it's going to get worse. I'm just saying it's important. We know this because the bottom line is every marriage needs work. And there's always a reason. Someone can always find a teretz and say this marriage isn't working. It's not the derech hatera. We do everything possible to stay. Now, it's true, some people will say, I know my parents had a loveless marriage. They didn't like each other. They just stayed together because that's what they did. They were Russians, and Russians never divorce, like that. Again, and so my answer always to that is, you know what? On the other hand, they also created stability for you. The guy says, it wasn't stable. They yelled at each other. Yeah, but you didn't have to get used to a step-parent. You didn't have to be shuffled from one house to another house every second Shabbos. Don't underestimate that. That can really be very disturbing. And you build a marriage. It's not like your parent. Learn from them and build what should be built. But these are part of what the history is, and it could be difficult. I'm not denying it's one of the most difficult issues to deal with. I just want to conclude that the same approach is not just with Shalom Bayis, it's with everything. Sadly, I don't know why it's this way. All of Chassidus is built on as a chassid is nicht elend. Chassid is not alone. That we always have chaver, the whole idea of fabrengen. I mean, a lot of this became very mechanical. We fabreng, but do we really care about each other? And by the Rebbe, by the older Rebbeim, this was a yesod of Yesedis, avos achim, that there was a certain chibuk chaverim and idea of not just learning together and hanging out together, but also caring. There are guys, a lot of people. You have friends that you may not even know, maybe suffering more than you think. Now, I'm not saying your job is to go probe, you don't want to become a yenta that knows everyone's problems and you're busy fixing everybody. But you have to be a sensitive person. If you see someone, whatever reason, you may be the right person to be the person that has to approach them or at least do something to address the issue. Because like I told the story in the beginning with a woman, she could have ignored her tenant. But she helped her. She ended up helping her. And the Rebbe made it clear that's what he wanted from us. So Hashgacha Pratis, something comes your way. That Baal Shem Tov says, everything you see and hear is a Heirah. Everything is even a spiegel, a mirror. That it's not, the approach of a chassid is to care, to hear the Kel Yelad Becha. The Rebbe teaches Kel Yelad Becha doesn't only mean a newborn. Everyone has a Kel Yelad Becha within him. So it's important to be sensitive to this and do something. And you may not be the person, but make someone else aware. I think if every one of us applied the Alter Rebbe's vakosha, that we should reach out and offer help, especially if someone is asking. I think our whole community, our whole lives would be a little more edel, a little more sensitive. And this, of course, is the Rebbe's Heirah, the Frierdiker Rebbe's Heirah from the Megillah. We're going to read Purim. The Megillah, what's the lashon there? Asher kara loi. That Mordechai felt the tsar, it's like as if it happened to him. Not just like tsar, that something you're being bothered, but it bothered him. That Rebbeim always felt that the tsar of somebody also bothered the Rebbe, not just he's coming to help. And we have these Eiros all over, and it's important to keep that in mind. You're young and energetic, and hopefully not jaded yet. You're still pure, right? Everything's everything lefierach. So remember, we have a responsibility, and I'm glad you asked the question. I'm glad that I'm addressing it. And okay, so we'll conclude now. I wanted to say was that I will continue to be here, and maybe it'll be in a different format. Maybe I'll come for another Seder Chassidus, and just take questions, or people can come over and speak to me one-on-one. We're figuring that out. So stay tuned. Anyway, so I'm not saying goodbye. Obviously, I have to share Thursday. Is a Seder Thursday? Yeah. Okay. Even though what is Tainus Esther?
People at 8:45 a.m. on Tainus finished.
So you can stay home, right? Since face show into the fast, right? Okay, we'll stop here. Shukayach, guys. Yeah.